Over the last few days, there has, throughout the length and the breadth of our country, been quite a lot of discussion among South Africans on matters that arose in the course of the testimony of Minister Nene at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. Now, as a consequence of these developments, Minister Nene this morning submitted a letter of resignation to me in which he requested that I should relieve him of his position of Minister of Finance of the Republic of South Africa. He has indicated that there is risk that the developments around his testimony that he gave to the Commission on State Capture will detract from the important task of serving the people of South Africa, particularly as we work to re-establish public trust in government. After due consideration of the circumstances surrounding this matter and in the interests of good governance, I have decided to accept his resignation. During his tenure as Minister of Finance, Minister Nene served the people and the government of the Republic of South Africa with diligence and great ability. He served our people under very difficult circumstances and often coming under great pressure, but he consistently defended the cause of proper financial management as well as clean governance. It is indeed a measure of Nene's character and his commitment to the national interests of our country that he has taken this decision to resign in the wake of errors of judgment, even though he has not been implicated in any act of wrongdoing himself. Now, I wish to take this opportunity to thank him for his service to the people of South Africa and to our government. And in the wake of Mr. Nene's resignation, I have decided to appoint Mr. Mboweni as the Minister of Finance with immediate effect. As former Governor of the Reserve Bank of South Africa, and before that as Minister of Labour, Mr. Mboweni brings to this position vast experience in areas of finance, economic policy, as well as in governance. Mr. Mboweni takes on this responsibility at a very critical time for our economy as we intensify cooperation amongst all social partners in our country to increase investment, to accelerate growth, and create jobs on a much more substantial scale. This moment calls for strong, capable, and steady leadership that will unlock the various new opportunities that have been identified by the social partners, particularly as clearly stated during the Job Summit, so that we can grow our economy and also transform it. I am confident that Mr. Mboweni will provide the leadership that is needed now as he works together with Deputy Minister Mondli Gungubele, Director General, and various Deputy Directors General in Treasury. Allow me to conclude with a few remarks about the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. It is critical that the Commission has the means and opportunity to effectively fulfill its mandate. In this process, no person should be above scrutiny and indeed no person should be above the law, and all relevant and credible accusations of wrongdoing should be thoroughly investigated. It is incumbent upon any person who may have any knowledge of any of the matters within the Commission's mandate to provide that information, provide it to the Commission, and to do so honestly and to do so fully and completely as well. For the country to move forward, we need to establish the full extent of state capture, identify those responsible for facilitating it, and take decisive steps to prevent this from ever happening again in South Africa. Throughout this process, we need to be guided by the values and principles of our Constitution, mindful of the importance of due process, committed to good governance, and determined that with the support of all South Africans, this Commission of Inquiry will succeed in fulfilling its very critical mandate. Once again, I wish to thank Mr. Nene, particularly for his tireless service to the country and to the people of South Africa. And I also wish Mr. Mboweni very good luck and well in his new role as he takes on the reins of being the Minister of Finance of our country. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If I could please once again invite you to take your seat.
Thank you.
May I ask the Director General, Dr. Cassius Lubisi, if you could please take over now for the process of the swearing in.
So what are you all sending out now? But I've been appointed Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed ladies and gentlemen from the media, senior leaders, Deputy Minister of Finance, we thank you for gracing this occasion. Without much further ado, as the President has already indicated, I will request His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, to proceed with the swearing-in ceremony of the Minister-designate. Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Cassius Lubisi, Director General of the Government. In terms of the powers vested in me by Section 91 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act number 108 of 1996, I have decided to appoint the following person as Minister for the portfolio indicated in the signed President's Act, Mr. Tito Titus Mboweni. I now request Judge Mantame to either swear or affirm him into office. Thank you.
Your Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, ladies and gentlemen, I will now commence with the swearing in of the Minister-designate, that is Mr. Titus Tito Mboweni. I request you to please join me to take an oath or affirmation. Which one are you going to take?
Swear. To swear.
Okay. Will you repeat after me?
I,
Tito Titus Mboweni,
Tito Titus Mboweni,
swear that I'll be faithful to the Republic of South Africa
swear that I'll be faithful to the Republic of South Africa
and will obey,
and will obey,
respect, and uphold the Constitution
respect, and uphold the Constitution
and all other law in the Republic,
and all other law in the Republic,
and I undertake to hold my office as Minister
and I undertake to hold my office as Minister
with honor and dignity,
with honor and dignity,
to be a true and faithful counselor,
to be a true and faithful counselor,
not to divulge directly or indirectly
not to divulge directly or indirectly
any secret matter entrusted to me,
any secret matter entrusted to me,
and to perform the functions of my office
and to perform the functions of my office
conscientiously and to the best of my ability.
conscientiously and to the best of my ability.
Now raise your right hand and say, please help me God.
So help me God.
You may sign. Here, you may sit down. Sign.
No, it's cheaper.
Austerity measures already.
You need to pack in your bag for that.
We've now come to the end of the session.
Oh, we should say you can shake hands. Thank you.
Get ready for your first cabinet meeting tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Minister Gab.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Congratulations to the new minister, and thank you to Madam Justice Mantame. We now will allow the president to take his leave. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
And so there you have it, a greatly anticipated announcement, and as they say, literally with the announcement and the stroke of a signature a signature that many of you may recognize and remember when he was Reserve Bank Governor, of course, for 10 years, between 1999 and 2009. Tito Mboweni is the new Finance Minister after the former Finance Minister, Nene, tendered his resignation, and he said that he had to resign because the project that was currently underway of restoring confidence and good governance in the country was too important, and it might be sidetracked. It was at risk of being sidetracked and distracted if he continued in office. The president applied his mind, and he felt that it was the right time to accept this resignation, and so immediately appointed Titus Mboweni as the finance minister. To help me unpack what's just happened, I'm now joined in studio by our very own head of the business news team here at the SABC, Thandeka Qubule-Mbeki. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And next to you, you have Professor Yanni Rousseau, Head of School, Senior School of Economics and Business Sciences at Wits University. Let me start with you, Thandeka. So in the days leading up today, there was speculation. Some names were starting to come through already. And I must admit, personally, I was a bit surprised the name of Tito Mboweni coming through, but I suppose when it's all come out and we look at his history, maybe it wasn't such a great surprise.
Indeed, I wasn't surprised by the choice of Tito Mboweni, but today is significant. It's a historic day. It's significant maybe on 3 counts. It's significant because the choice of Tito Mboweni is perhaps going to be seen as a choice of a particular policy trajectory in economics. A choice of orthodox economics, and particularly a particular stance that we are very familiar with in monetary policy. So it's also quite historic that Nene chose to fall on his sword. In our political culture, that was getting to be something that was a bit of a problem, that politicians discovered to be in the wrong or having fallen foul of their oaths of office, simply apologize and we all move on, as if an apology excuses or washes away the consequences of improper public behavior. Now, this falling on its sword is historic because after 10 years in which politicians found to have been foul on governance grounds have just dug in their heels, and the bigger the allegations, they would just dig in. And it's the return to public life of somebody we are very familiar with, and that signature that he just signed onto his oath of office is that signature that's on our banknotes. And many of our old banknotes, we remember, have that very distinct signature. But we decided today to invite Professor Rousseau with us because he worked with Tito Mboweni at the Reserve Bank. Even though he now heads the economics department at Wits, there were very historic times with Tito Mboweni at the bank, at the central bank.
Yes, hello Peter, hello Thandeka. Thank you for the invitation to talk about Mr. Mboweni, a person I have the highest respect and regard for. I've worked with him at the central bank, as you've said, for many years. He's an excellent choice as Minister of Finance. But let me also add that I have the highest respect, highest regard for Mr. Nene to have done the right thing and resigned. And I hope that Mr. Nene's resignation will send a signal, will start a new trend in government where people who are in the wrong do the right thing, do the honourable thing, and resign from such positions. So let me really say I have high regard for Mr. Nene's conduct. That is what we expect from cabinet ministers. Then turning to Mr. Mboweni, it's an excellent appointment. He is a very good administrator. He's very knowledgeable about the economy. He made a big success as governor of the South African Reserve Bank. We have the same high expectations of him as Minister of Finance.
So I'm going to get to Tito Mboweni just now, but just to close off and Nene properly, perhaps in many ways a precedent has been set now. The president was quite careful to say and point out that, look, he hasn't been found guilty of anything. There was an error of judgment, and that he felt that it was a sign of his character, actually, to fall on his sword, as you said. Will that mean that anybody right now who perhaps might fall into this category of error of judgment, having gone to the Gupta compound, visited the family, has now got to step forward because Nhlanhla Nene has led the way of what to do?
I feel sorry that the president is in the position in which he is, in the sense that you cannot reshuffle or replace ministers every single day. And there are so many ministers and so many people implicated, just judging from the Gupta leaks alone, who will perhaps have to consider falling on their swords. And yes, this is the threshold now that has been set by Nhlanhla Nene. But we mustn't forget the service that he did do the country in his time as minister of standing against state capture.
Right.
For me, Peter, the error of judgment of Mr. Nene is not so much visiting the Guptas. Obviously, he did that on instruction of then President Zuma, at whose pleasure he served in cabinet. The error of judgment was, in my view, not disclosing it when confronted with the fact. I do not see visiting the Guptas as the error of judgment, but the non-disclosure at the time as the error of judgment. Cabinet ministers visited the Guptas on instruction of President Zuma. It was an error of judgment by President Zuma at the time, but we cannot say that everybody who visited the Guptas should now resign. But people who were not candid about it, who were not forthcoming about it, there is the error of judgment.
All right, the market is flat at the moment, literally 0 points at the moment, 0.01%. So this suggests that this has had a calming effect that was required to put the right person in place and deal with the Nene situation straight away.
That was swift action from the presidency. The finance portfolio is not a portfolio you can leave hanging and in limbo for a long time. So that was swift and it was a definite move to calm the markets and to reassure South Africans that we are in a safe pair of hands.
All right. So Tito Mboweni, tell us about his decision-making, his ability to lead and to manage, and why you think he's going to be a good minister.
Mr. Mboweni is a clear leader. He's very well respected. He gets on well with people. And in a leadership role, it's necessary to take people with you. In that sense, he instills confidence in his leadership style. He builds a good relationship with the people that he leads. And in any ministry, it's very important to build a relationship with the government department. We've seen in many cases in South Africa where the ministry and the government department that the minister is responsible for ended up in low-scale warfare with one another. This will not happen under Mr. Mboweni. We also have to remember that Mr. Mboweni served in cabinet under President Mandela about 20 years ago, so he understands the protocols of cabinet and understands the role of cabinet ministers from that perspective. So that experience, plus his experience at the Reserve Bank, plus the fact that that he commands high respect from international investors, bankers, etc., and is highly regarded in South Africa, will help him to ensure success in this portfolio, and we desperately need that. I have real confidence in Mr. Mboweni to be a good finance minister.
I'm just hoping that we'll see less orthodoxy and more economic policy innovation, because he's coming into a portfolio at a time of a recession and at desperate times, and many of the old stock of policies has not worked. In fact, they have failed dismally, and we are hoping to see more policy innovation, more ability to test and push the envelope when it comes to policy initiatives that can take us out of the current recession and the low growth trap in which this economy finds itself.
All right, so the markets seem to think that it's a good choice. Let's get a view from Labour now. We're joined on the line by SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Mavavi. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. We spoke to you a little bit earlier on, and you were adamant that Nhlanhla Nene had to go. Well, he has now gone, so you're pleased on that count. But what about the appointment of Tito Mboweni, who you might have known when he was Minister of Labour?
Well, we know him very well. As you know, we worked with him when he was in a breathtaking, ghastly spearhead had the process of transforming the labor market from the apartheid era and to a post-democratic era. And in our view, he did very well. And he was consultative. He was open to persuasion. He had strong views at times. He's a good listener, and we know that. But he then went to the position of the Reserve Bank governor, and in our view, he became more conservative. He embraced the status quo of chasing the inflation when we felt that the bigger crisis for South Africa to be targeted was the crisis of unemployment, poverty, and inequalities. We had huge disagreement about that within, and I guess those disagreements will remain. I think that his appointment is meant to please the markets, and from what your studio is saying, they are pleased, and they should be pleased because the status quo will be maintained. And for workers, nothing will change. The crisis of unemployment will be secondary to the conservative orthodox monetary policies. And I'm sorry, for workers, nothing will change.
But you said that he does listen, so maybe he might lend you an ear and convince you of his policies.
We can always hope so. There's definitely one thing about him, he doesn't run away from an engagement. With his strong views, he will listen. He won't run away. He won't shut the door. He won't try to isolate anybody. And he will try to convince us. But from our point of view, there's nothing we can be convinced about the current fiscal and monetary policies because we have evidence that they have dismally failed, leading to a crisis at hand now where unemployment have reached the unprecedented levels of 37.4%, and where 9.7 million people, or nearly 10 million, are unemployed, majority of whom are the young people, where we have become the most unequal society in the world, and where 55% of the population is trapped in degrading poverty. And so we will continue to argue that we are in the wrong macroeconomic path, and that we need to abandon this in favor of much more expansive fiscal and monetary policies, prioritizing industrialization in that process and addressing the structural issues in the economy that were left unattended, even in the context of the much publicized job summit that took place on the 4th and 5th of October.
All right, before I let you go, what do you think actually of Nene falling on his sword for the greater good of the nation, as he put it?
Well, I thought that he was in trouble the minute he admitted that he lied. But to me, the issue is not whether he lied or not. I suspect that if we were to use a new standard that says anyone who met the Guptas must fall, then I suspect we'll be left with no leadership, no cabinet, at least in the ANC. And the issue to me is whether in those discussions he did return some favor, advantage them in one way or another, or do all of these things that we now know these guys were calling ministers into their compound for, which is to cut corners and to advantage them in a manner that undermines anything that we call transparency and good governance. But to me, the most serious allegation that he had to face is the allegation flowing from the Mail and Guardian that says that he advantaged and he chaired a meeting where his son was awarded over R1 billion by the PIC, and an allegation secondly that says that billion was then written off on the basis that his own son was untraceable. He has not responded, or at least we have not heard him strongly denying that, and that's why we thought that on that strength of that PIC allegation, he has to go. More so, because today, as we speak, senior executives of the PIC were in a hearing. They are being persecuted by somebody who we are told is supposed to be investigated, the CEO of the PIC. The whistleblowers are running for cover. They are being dealt with. And that's why we have made a call to the president to say it ought not just be Nene that must be recalled. In our view, the current PIC CEO, Mr. Machila, must be suspended with immediate effect, and all of those people that are being put on trial for whistleblowing the corruption in the PIC must be allowed to provide evidence to an independent commission of inquiry on the affairs of the PIC.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the line, Zwelinzima Mavavi, the General Secretary of the Trade Federation, SAFTU. So he did raise some concerns about the switch that he made from when he was Labour Minister to the Reserve Bank Governor, which has its own responsibilities. And this one perhaps has got huge responsibilities because whatever he says and does will affect so many things. Will he be the conservative Tito Mboweni or the less conservative Tito Mboweni in his new job? Let me start with you, Tande.
Well, that remains to be seen. Your guess is as good as mine. I am hoping for more expansive economic policies, and I'm hoping that we will try to remedy the policy deadlock that we are caught in by opening up and listening to all the stakeholders in our society. After all, this economy shouldn't be run in the interests of some, but in the interests of all our citizens.
So what kind of finance minister does our economy need?
Peter Tandeka, I'm a very conservative economist, as you know.
Yes,
I believe in inflation targeting. Mr. Mboweni strongly believes in inflation targeting. He believes that we should mention the target as 6% to 3% rather than 3% to 6% to show that we are continuously trying to push this down. Now, naturally, Mr. Mboweni understands the fiscal challenges that the country faces, and in his new role he must think from a fiscal perspective, not from a monetary perspective. I have no doubt that he will leave the Reserve Bank independent and autonomous to discharge its responsibilities and to achieve the inflation target, and that will be an important work relationship between he and Mr. Lesetja Ganyagu, the Governor of the Reserve Bank. I also hope that if Mr. Mboweni buys official cars as a new Minister of Finance, that he buys conservative and cheap cars, preferably made in South Africa. That will be an important symbol of a minister that understands that the country is in trouble and that we need to rein in unnecessary government expenditure. I have high expectations of Mr. Mboweni, that he will understand the challenges and that he will cut the cloth to cut according to his cloth to make the economy and make the fiscal position of the government a success again.
If we have a finance minister who does much as we've done before, how do we hope to get out of the economic rut into which we've fallen? Our problems are deep and structural. They require deep and creative thinking. They also require us to look at the examples of other countries that have come away from situations similar to ours and found a way and a path to growth. And if we continue to do what we have done before, we plod along, rather more like muddle along on the same path on which we have traveled, we will get deeper, and unemployment will reach 10%, and we will reach 10 million people, and we may go to an election with even higher unemployment.
But in real terms, we're talking as if this guy is as an absolute minister, but he actually has a party that he has to answer to, that has a committee that sits and discusses the policies that the party wants to push through. I suppose his hands are sort of hamstrung a little bit about how far he can go outside of what the party has decided for the country.
And naturally, but there's a lot of room to cut expenditure within the government. And if we can cut government expenditure, we will release resources for all the things that Tandeka is pleading for. We can reduce the size of the cabinet probably by half without affecting service delivery. We can rein in the civil service remuneration by giving lower than inflation adjustments, whereas inflation adjustments were given over the past 5 or 6 years, and even adjustments in excess of inflation had been given, to the point where government remuneration currently accounts for 44% of tax revenue of the country. So if that can be reined in, it will not affect service delivery, but it will release resources to be used for all the things that Thandeka is pleading for, and which incidentally I agree with. But I want to see this within a restructuring of government expenditure with the resources it has at the moment. A smaller cabinet makes a lot of sense. Buying only local vehicles for the government vehicle fleet will save the government a big amount and can release a lot of resources to use in South Africa and will stimulate our economy. So we agree on what must be achieved, we disagree on how to achieve that objective.
Do we know anything about the relationship that he has or has enjoyed with President Cyril Ramaphosa over the years?
They would have served together at a crucial time at Luthuli House. We know that Mr. Tito Mboweni served in Luthuli House as part of the emerging Economic Transformation Committee. There in a little office, he worked with Maria Ramos and Trevor Manuel, designing what would be the early economic policies, and they lived in that milieu of a lot of economic debates in the early years of the Mandela administration, or those years leading up to the Mandela administration, and they became ensconced as officials during the Mandela presidency, and they lived on beyond that. I think he would have worked very well with President Ramaphosa, who was also part of that negotiations milieu, mainly looking at the laws and the constitutional dispensation that we would then evolve and live in. Yes, I think that they will make a good fit for each other. But all I can say is that trimming the public purse will do some good, but it will not reverse deindustrialization or deal decisively with the unemployment problem. For that, we need immense intellectual power to sit in Treasury and to redesign our course, our economic trajectory as a nation. So all I can say really is uneasy lies the head that wears the throne of our Treasury.
The elections are not far away now, and I guess at this time, is it more about let's get into a holding pattern, let's not upset too many things, let's not be too radical, and get a full mandate at the next elections, and there we see these big changes? Or is that going to be too far down the line, too late for where we are at the moment?
We already expect the announcement of the details of a fiscal stimulus package in the MTBPS of the 24th of October. That was announced by President Ramaphosa recently. So we need to get the details of the MTBPS before we can even try and speculate how things will play out to the election. And then, of course, once we see the election results and we see the new cabinet after the election, we will understand what the plans of President Ramaphosa will be going forward.
Mighty, yeah?
I don't know about you, Yanni or
Yeah.
Peter. I think that speech has been written. And I think
He's
that
just gonna read
speech
it.
has been discussed. I think Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, will step up to the podium and read Nene's speech.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that one. But in that speech, even though it has already been written, we will see the details of the package.
Yes, indeed. We look forward to the package to see whether it's going to be a holding pattern, as you anticipate, or whether President Ramaphosa will push the envelope in terms of trying to see how much economic leeway we can.
So you don't think there's an opportunity for him to tweak things a little bit?
Between now and the 24th of
It's
October,
too far down the line.
he might change a few things, but it will be at the margin. The most of the documentation had by now probably already been printed, because there's voluminous documentation with the MTBPS. So he might tweak a few things at the margin, but it would be unfair to expect from Mr. Mboweni, being appointed on the 9th of October to really put his stamp on the budget, the MTBPS of the 24th of October.
What kind of things will change at Treasury with his appointment, with the history that you have with him?
Well, it's not clear to me what has changed already from Minister Gigaba to Minister Nene. But in terms of perspective on fiscal matters, Mr. Nene and Mr. Mboweni, in my mind, will be close to one another with Mr. Gigaba removed. So stability must be brought to the Treasury. Under Mr. Gigaba, the Treasury has lost a number of good staff members. We hope we can entice some of them back. Michael Sachs comes to mind, who the Treasury lost. He was a very good Deputy Director General. Ian Stewart is a very good Deputy Director General, and we trust that more certainty will be brought for senior Treasury officials. Because, yes, of course, we need a good Minister of Finance, but we also need a good team at Treasury. In many respects, your Minister of Finance is only as good as your Treasury team. And of course, you touched on the point, the Minister of Finance needs the support of the President of the Republic. There's no doubt about that, and my sense is that Mr. Mboweni is close to President Ramaphosa.
All right, we're going to get some reaction on social media just now, but before that, I'm busy watching the markets at the moment, and it's literally stayed flat. It had gone up a little bit, down 0.06%, so it might suggest that they had expected this.
Yes, there were some rumours in the market, and Bloomberg took off from the start of blocks much before us, but it's a muted response because, as Professor Rousseau points out, Tito Mboweni is very close in terms of their fiscal stance and their policy positions to Minister Nene. So I would understand the market response being muted.
Okay. All right, let's see if we can get some social media response and see what people have been saying. They've been speculating all morning. And the names, of course, Barbara Creasy had been there for a while, and Tito Mboweni coming through. Mzwake Mbunda says, thanks, my president at Cyril Ramaphosa, for appointing Mr. Mboweni as our new finance minister at Tito Mboweni. Kagiso says, Tito Mboweni hit the ground running. I can't imagine a better leader for the job. So positivity so far. Photography by Tuso Ramatu says that congratulations Tito Mboweni on your appointment as finance minister. South Africa, sir, wishing you all the best in the future. I know you got this. And victory sign there. Cyril Ramaphosa, good move, Mr. President, for appointing Tito Mboweni as finance minister. You are indeed a good leader. Positive news for the national currency, trading at 15 Rand earlier, now at 14.75. So currency is loving the news. We have another tweet here saying, congratulations to Tito Mboweni. Sha, but we need more young people with fresh ideas in government. And that was the last message that we got. And I was just wondering, as we're speaking there, because as Reserve Bank Governor, he was well known internationally, the ratings agencies would have watched this, and they're not busy trying to go through Wikipedia to find out who on earth is Tito Mboweni, as happened with Des Van Rooyen. This is a good thing, and I suppose that the ratings agency might take this positively as well.
Yes, the president has appointed an international financial statesman who is well known to the World Bank, the IMF, and to many of the players in the banking establishment and to many of our international investors.
There is now an IMF World Bank meeting in Singapore. Mr. Mboweni can literally fly there tonight, walk in there tomorrow, and will understand the discussions and will be able to make a contribution as he walks in tomorrow morning. That is the stature he has, that is the background he has.
And put in a few tweets while he's at it.
Well, he is a prolific tweeter, isn't he?
On Twitter.
And it'll be interesting to see if he's going to be that finance minister.
I'm not so sure that it is such a good idea for a politician to be a prolific tweeter. I can think of Mr. Trump, and please, I can think of Helen Zille. And for her own good, Helen Zille's tweeting rights should be suspended. So I'm not so sure that the politician should really start to communicate through tweets.
If he cuts off his Twitter line, I'm surely going to miss when he puts in a new steak of rump in his oven because he let us know about it. Or has caught a new fish.
But I guess he is more than anybody fully aware that everything that a finance minister says is potentially market moving, and I think he learned that back in the day, didn't he?
Yes, and also when he was governor.
Yeah.
And the other positive thing, we have to admit that on occasion, in many countries, including South Africa, we had tension between the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Reserve Bank. And in this instance, I really expect the new Finance Minister, Minister Mboweni, or I must get used to Minister Mboweni rather than Governor Mboweni, and Governor Ganyago to get on very well and to be able to work out a very good relationship between fiscal and monetary policy for the improvement of South Africa.
All right, so we're going to try and get more reaction from political party leaders. But first, Tito Mboweni was a part of a team that worked with the Ugandan president, the Rwandan president rather, Paul Kagame, on the African Union reform. To discuss the new appointment, we're now joined on the line by the leader of the UDM, Bantu Holomisa. Thank you very much for joining us on the line. Your thoughts about what's happened today? Nhlanhla Nene out, Tito Mboweni in.
First of all, I think we should welcome President Ramaphosa's decision to show Nhlanhla Nene the door. We have consistently been calling on the president to act with speed in instituting a commission of inquiry regarding the PIC. Sadly, the outgoing minister, Nene, was stalling in publishing the terms of reference and the committee itself. But it turned out when we submitted a dossier to Advocate Butlander, who is doing a PIC forensic audit, that his son was part of a Mozambican oil deal, which of course you read about it last Friday. Those details we handed them over to Advocate Butlander, justifying that the CEO of PIC, Dan Machile, and a certain Fidelis must be suspended with immediate effect because of their involvement in that oil deal. But the rest is history, and we wish Tito Mboweni well. He's a veteran. He has been there. He has been presiding over many policies of the ruling party from 1994. And I'm sure he can now advise Cyril Ramaphosa to say, Madiba, Mbeki, Zuma tried this one, it didn't work. So we rather get a better ingredient to make sure that poverty and unemployment is addressed with immediate effect. But all we are asking now for Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of the Republic, is for him to make sure that he publishes the terms of reference of the PIC, and that those terms of reference must also include the transactions like the one of Mozambique and many others which we have handed over to his office. There must be no pussyfooting anymore.
What would you say are the most urgent things that Minister Tito Mboweni has to attend to from your perspective?
Well, Tito Mboweni will have to hit the ground running. But Tito Mboweni, remember that he hasn't got all the answers. There is a cabinet there, there is Department of Treasury, so he would need to be orientated as to how far they have gone in preparing for the midterm budget in a few weeks' time, and what are the plans
for next year. You must also remember that Tito Mboweni, as a member of the NEC, he also sits in the Khotla. So there is nothing new really which he will be expecting to know, because he is in the economic cluster of the ANC. So he should be able to fit in quickly and easily.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the line. Thank you so much for your comments. Okay, so that was Bantu Holomisa, the leader of the UDM. Joining me now is the SABC's political editor, Dumisani Slope. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So everything has a political ramification. What's the political consequence or effect of what's happened today?
Well, I usually say that economics is politics applied. So everything, starts politically. Look, I think it's an interesting, because it puts pressure on other ministers who may have been found to be implicated in terms of a relationship with Guptas to follow suit, to deal with their conscience and possibly resign without necessarily being pushed by the president. But at the same time, I think the EFF is going to continue with its pressure on the president to force other ministers to resign. As we speak, they've already released a statement in terms of who should be going to follow suit the resignation of Nene. So that pressure from the opposition will continue.
Who have they pointed out, the EFF?
Well, they've pointed out Kikaba, I think the Munkonyane, amongst others, but they are onto this sustained pressure. I was talking to one of our professors in politics who says that perhaps it's time that South Africa should consider a corruption truth commission, where possibly everyone that may be implicated in corrupt activities could come out and make a full disclosure and move forward, as was done in other countries. I don't think necessarily that's going to happen, because sometimes when people come up and admit to their corrupt activities and they resign, they are condemning themselves to poverty. So I don't see necessarily that happening anytime soon. But I think that pressure will continue, and I think there are also possibilities that the State Capture Commission might also become increasingly a very good political football, either for political parties or various factions within political parties to deal with one another.
All right, so again, without going into too much detail, I guess the issue that the president said just as he was closing, he said, I want to talk about state capture, and he insisted that there's nobody that's going to be above the law and nobody that is going to be left out, and that it was incumbent on people to step forward. Are we likely to see some people stepping forward now, because it's out there now? I mean, it's almost as if the door is open and he's asking people to behave or to step forward, and that they do it of their own accord.
Well, I'm not sure if he should be asking or he should be exercising his authority. I think as a leader who has come into the position that he holds on the basis of promoting good governance, clean governance, and dealing with corruption and getting South African tax monies back from where it has been, kept away through corruption, I'm not sure where he should be pleading to people. Perhaps he should take a decision and exercise his authority in terms of promoting good governance. So I'm not convinced that a whole lot of people are going to follow the example of Nene and resign. In any event, I don't think any of the information, which is most of the information that comes out of the State Capture Commission, is not necessarily new in the public space. It's just that this one is dramatic to the extent that it involved the finance minister.
All right. The UDM leader, Thandeka, was talking about the PIC in particular, and he says that a commission of inquiry needs to be set up. And I guess a lot of people need to have faith and trust in this institution once again. I guess that's an important thing that needs to happen.
I think one of the first things that must be in his in tray when he comes into the office is the stabilization of the PIC. It's important in substance and actually, but it's also important symbolically because the PIC is the largest pool of consolidated funds on the continent, and that it is managed properly by the authorities that have oversight over it is exceedingly important to it's the collective savings of the public servants of this country, and he needs to move swiftly and firmly to stabilize the situation at the PIC.
All right, Professor. So at the same time that all of this is happening, we've got the state-owned enterprises that Praveen Gordon's trying to stabilize as well. They're going to have to work together very closely to get to the point that this country needs.
Yeah, Peter, in terms of state-owned enterprises, I'm on record. I've said before, non-performing, non-essential state-owned enterprises should either be closed or given away. I mean, something like SAA is a vanity project for politicians. Give the thing away. So I hope that Mr. Mboweni and Mr. Gordhan will reach this conclusion jointly. SAA will not fly. Literally, it will not fly.
Wow.
Now, apparently politicians feel very emotional about seeing SAA planes on airports internationally. Park the planes there and wash them. It will be cheaper than to try and fly them. So it will be necessary for Mr. Mboweni with Mr. Gordhan, his cabinet colleague, to go through the state-owned enterprises, figure out which ones must be saved, because some of them must be saved, and those that are non-essential, just close them or get rid of them and save taxpayers billions of rands, which brings us back to the point you made earlier. There is room for economic stimulus in the current fiscal structure if we stop wasting money on things like SAA. The point you made, we need this desperately, but not wasting it on SAA.
The Chinese had a very interesting approach to the family silver, the state-owned enterprises. They looked at the underlying sectors in which these they were ailing at the time, enterprises were operating. They said, how can we restructure things? How can we reconfigure the public sector and make it a contributor to the fiscus and to the economy, rather than just sell off the family jewels because we can? All
right. Talk to me about the political pressure, because this man doesn't operate in an office in isolation. There's political pressure around him from all sides.
Exactly, and that's the challenge that I'm listening, because if you are going to think about Tito Mboweni as a finance minister in isolation to the collective where he operates, you are likely to get things wrong. Ultimately, what Tito Mboweni is expected to implement is not necessarily what he thinks per se. What he thinks is valuable, but then it's a basic fact that it belongs to the African National Congress, and therefore he has to implement the resolution of the African National Congress as from Nasrec. He has to work with his collective, within cabinet, and to a greater extent, the ANC government policies on economic affairs have not changed in the last 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So sometimes it's easy to get carried away by the newness of a person into a position and forget that he operates within a given collective, and that is what is going to bind him.
All right. Again, we're getting more and more reaction from as many people as we can. Let's hear from another economist, Isaiah Matlanga. Thank you very much for joining us on the line. Your thoughts on Tito Mboweni's appointment as finance minister?
I think in terms of stabilizing the finance ministry, or at least the view that perhaps the finance ministry has in a constant decline for some time, and given the new revelations from former finance minister Nene, Tito Mboweni is a great replacement. But I think this needs to be understood in the context of the economic cluster, which means National Treasury does not function alone as an institution. It functions together with other government departments that are responsible for running macroeconomic policy of the country. But he also comes with a very strong and long history in public office, strong credibility in financial markets, both locally and globally, which means he is going to assist in the confidence building that is required to attract the $100 billion that the president has been asking for. So overall, this is a great replacement to Finance Minister Nene. But another aspect as well is the bar for removing a finance minister who would have been found to have contravened some sort of a law or who is not viewed in good light has been reduced, which means this is good for good governance, clean government going forward.
Would you say that Nene is now lost to us completely, or can we find a space for him if he gets over his hurdles that he's facing at the moment?
I think that remains to be seen, because we don't know the details of the discussions of the meetings that he said he attended. But I think if we consider over the past 2 years or so, he oversaw National Treasury during a period where it was under attack politically. And from what we know now, he prevented the signing of a 1.5 trillion rand nuclear deal, which would have put South Africa on a declining path for many years to come. So for that, I think we have to say he did a great job as finance minister, especially given the times that we were operating at. And I'm sure he will surface somewhere within public office. I think he still has a role to play in public office. Of course, bearing anything that may come from his meetings that he had with the Guptas.
All right. If you were advising Tito Mboweni right now, what's the immediate things that he needs to do straight away?
I think it's nothing different to what Nene has been doing. Firstly, is to make sure that we continue with fiscal consolidation, reducing our debt levels, making sure that our credit ratings remain where they are or even improve over the next few years or so. And again, the budget at this point in time has already been completed. It's only 2 weeks from the medium-term budget policy statement, so we should not expect a new finance minister to come and change the budget completely. That's not how Treasury works. So the budget has been completed. His task is merely to come and reassert the confidence of the investor community in National Treasury in South Africa in the management of our finances, so that there is a belief that our finances are in good hands and are being used in a good manner. That's all he needs to do.
Okay, Mr. Matlanga, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Dumisani Hlope, has this been a stroke of genius on President Cyril Ramaphosa's behalf? Is it going to gain him some political capital as he starts marching towards elections?
A stroke of genius. For me, when I look at the leadership of President Ramaphosa, he seems to be somebody who doesn't want to rock the boat, so to speak. So he's a bit careful, he engages, he speaks with the stakeholders, and by the time he reaches a decision, it seems to be a safer decision to make. So I think he went for a safe route in terms of a political leadership stance. But I think he is going to face some serious challenges from the left. You know, the left-leaning political parties in this country, because they wouldn't necessarily associate Minister Mboweni with, you know, your left-leaning type of economic policies or management of state resources. So he's going to have a challenge in that regard. But when it comes to the mainstream business, I think for them, I think it will be a good one. So you won't have a problem in that space.
Nene, we've been talking all the positive things about Tito Mboweni, all the great things that he might be able to bring to the table. As someone who knows him, what might be his Achilles heel? What might be the things that he needs to watch in his new job?
It will be necessary, as Dumisani explained, for Mr. Mboweni to remember that he's in cabinet, and that he must take his cabinet ministers with him. Yes, of course, as I've said in the Reserve Bank, he was the leader, he was the governor, and he took his colleagues with him, but he was the governor. There's only one governor. There are deputy governors and there are senior executives, but there is the governor, whereas here is a minister. It will be necessary for Minister Mboweni. I must get used to Minister Mboweni. I still think of Governor Mboweni. It will be necessary for Minister Mboweni to build a structure and to get his cabinet colleagues to work with him towards a common goal. That is a big challenge, which is different to the role he had at the central bank. We will have to see how that role plays out.
Is there anything that comes to mind for you, Thandeka?
I think one of the urgent things that he must do in-house at Treasury is to redevelop, it's speaking to what Professor Rousseau said earlier, redevelop the brains trust. And in order to accommodate what Dumi is speaking about, he would need to fill it with a diversity of thinking so that there is the kind of dynamic intellectual friction that you would need to check your stance against others. So if he's got an internal brains trust that he can trust, excuse the pun, and he makes sure that he listens to a diversity of opinions and particularly innovative thinking about how to unplug this economy, then he will, I believe, build a winning team. And this country sorely needs a winning team that can think through these problems and test new approaches to intractable problems or problems that we previously thought to be intractable and come up with world-leading solutions.
It's also a political job, as we've kind of hinted, and I wonder how good are his politics and political gamesmanship, Tito Mboweni?
Well, look, for someone who at some point was the Minister of Labour, I would assume that he's well vested with the various ideological sections of society. So I wouldn't doubt him there in terms of negotiating his way out with a variety of, stakeholders. And by the way, the strongest combination that you need in any cabinet, it's a good synergy between the President and the Minister of Finance. And together, I think they can make that necessary combination. But I think he does have the ability to navigate across ideological spectrum. And I think, like Thandeka says, which is a point which for every time in this country we undermine, it is the capacity of government to perform that matters a great deal here. You can put another minister today, you put yourself there as a Minister of Finance, but the main challenge is the capacity of this government to perform effectively.
All right, so political parties are kind of, they seem to be fairly positive with this appointment. The people on the ground, how are they going to receive this? Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, no, look, that's very difficult to gauge at this point in time, but South African citizens are by and large highly politicized, citizens. They are politically aware, they're economically conscious. I mean, the bulk of the service delivery protests that you see, they know exactly who's responsible for the need for that delivery. I don't think this is going to, they are going to have to open up some kind of affinity with the current appointment of the new finance minister, because their focus is on local government service delivery. So if you look at all these Westbury, Kanyamazane, Mboweni and Limpopo and all over the place, they are basically saying that get local government working. And I think by and large, that is where the masses are focused at this point in time, not necessarily right at the top.
All right.
Yeah, my feeling is that the average South African at this point in time on fiscal and financial economic matters, they are concerned about the petrol price, which is not under the control of the Minister of Finance. And they are really concerned that we might see further tax increases in next year's budget. And if we need to see tax increases next year, and particularly if it's necessary to increase VAT from 15% to 16%, it will be a very important test for Minister Mboweni on how to sell that to his cabinet colleagues and to the general public.
Thandeka, a final thought?
Jobs. South Africans are concerned about jobs. If I can have a job, I can find my way in this economy. And we have the kind of unemployment that you find in war zones. So if this minister can address the issue of joblessness in this economy, then I think South Africans would sit up and pay attention.
Fantastic. To my panel, thank you very much indeed. Thandeka Mbeki, Yanni Rousseau, and Dumisani Hlope. Thank you very much indeed for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and that's where we're going to leave the program. You've been watching Your Story, and of course the big story of today is that Tito Titus Mboweni, former Reserve Bank Governor of South Africa, is your new Finance Minister. From us, goodbye. Full View follows just now.
Try and tell funeral plans.
It's your final gift of love.
I chose the clientele funeral plan because it's affordable and suits my budget.
I chose clientele because they are an original. They've been around for a long time, and I know within my family are in good hands.
I'm a farmer, and I'm a businessman, and I know a good deal when I see one. Clientele is a good deal.
Clientele is the name I trust.
SMS plan to 31043 and we'll call you back.
We are tired and we want people to take action. We want government to take action because women are being raped, women are being killed, women are being sexually and physically abused every day. Children are going missing.
See men at the forefront of this march is what softens the heart and makes us all feel proud of the type of men that we have in our country.
Here, the rates of violence against women and children are alarmingly high. Enough is enough.
They've wasted our time, they've made our members to go on strike, they've made the public to suffer for nothing.
Andikwazi ukutya i-treatment ngendlela ngenxa into yoba imali ayikho.
Fumene 600 xa ndiphinda futhi ndidrowa ayiphumi ayikho kwa kwi-account.
What we are experiencing now is due to the number of people accessing the system at the same time. So if they can just be patient for 3 to 4 days.
Last week, residents from these areas embarked on a shutdown which turned into violent clashes with police in some areas. Protests were expected to resume today, but the Gauteng Shutdown Coordinating Committee says there's been a change of plans. What are those changes?
What has been going wrong is we've had all of these shutdowns in our communities. So that means that these communities are disabled. There's no activity happening there, and then we are breaking down our own communities. What we must do is we must take the fight to the powers that be.
We're coming to the powerhouses, and the JSE is the platform of all the powerhouses. We are coming here. This is notice today.
We will consider this and then we will be in touch with you.
If they don't respond to us within 7 days, we will begin to cut what we call the economic blood flow of these organizations.
This is Tanya Mukwamu, co-founder of a mobile application called MaxiCash. The app is aimed at helping African expatriates send money home.
When one thinks of sending money home, it could be peer-to-peer cash transfers, or it could be buying airtime or paying for school fees or hospital bills. So the list really expands. So it was just making that process a lot easier for African expats, bearing in mind that they have such high fees, going through your traditional agencies and so forth. So we just thought that, that money could be routed to better use.
Being an expat from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Tanya found it rather challenging to send money from South Africa to her home country. This is when the MaxiCash app was born.
It was really personal frustration to begin with, like I think a lot of solutions. I'm an expert myself. I'm originally from the DRC, so I've had that experience of sending money to my parents or anyone I support back home, and having to leave work and take time off, and there's so much paperwork and often you don't have the right papers. I've been robbed, believe it or not, with all the with cash on me. So it was really just my own experience, and through studies obviously I noticed that a lot of African experts and others experience the same issues. So it took the time to study and have the proper technology and make sure the market was ready for our solution.
Because of South Africa's functional banking infrastructure, mobile money services such as Kenya's M-Pesa rarely survive. What makes MaxiCash different from these?
The app is available for download on Google Play and your Apple Store. And one downloads it from anywhere. And we do have some selective markets where you can cash out your funds. So right now, from a cash out point of view, you can cash out in South Africa as well as the DRC, and soon entering into the Eastern African market. We integrate with the FNB e-wallet, so the recipient will receive the money like they would, you receive your SMS, your e-wallet payment is there, and you go to any FNB ATM and cash it out.
Tanya comes from a logistics and transportation industry and fell into the tech world, where she learnt a lot, and with the help of other techies, she eventually built an app that will make life easier for others.
Buy airtime. Obviously, you can sponsor airtime for someone across the border.
Just like fashion and music, dance is also one of my people's greatest art forms. You simply cannot call yourself an African if you cannot move your body to entertain and express yourself. From Dinaga and Kiba to Amazion in Moria, Ingoma Zomzabalazo, ballet and freestyle hip-hop, dance choreography remains one of those treasures I insist on exchanging from one generation to the next.
What inspired me to become a dancer is actually the fact that I was brought up in a township where there was a lot of activity happening in terms of political pressure. And we started a youth club for which we were keeping ourselves busy as the youth in the township. And I lived also close to a hostel, so we'll go there on Sundays and watch the hostel dwellers doing their indlamus and stratamias. So all those influences became actually my inspiration to dance, to choreograph. Choreography for me, it becomes really a calling because it's something that you do because there is a need and a burning desire for you to do something, to say something with your body, to say something with movement. And as we know that dance is really a non-verbal form. So we use movement to express our emotions, also to express, our dissatisfaction, to express also, to respond to our circumstances, what we see around us, also to respond to political pressures. So for me, choreography becomes really a statement on its own, because that's the point when you share your emotions with your audience.
First moved when I was in the States, and I thought that firstly I was the only black girl in auditions, and then thereafter I thought, we are not many black children are given the opportunity, and if I was able to excel and get all these bursaries and get all these jobs